Recently at our last large meeting of everybody, a very interesting conversation came up. And I'd like to talk further about that today. And I want to talk mostly about identity and practice. So this is a book that was given to me. Can you read this, or is it backwards?
Backwards.
Backwards, okay. Well, it's The Light of Zen in the West. It's by Hubert Benoit. And it was a present from Rachel. And it's been very interesting to me to read it, because this is the book that when I was living in Seattle, before I came to Zen Center, someone gave me this book, part of it, the Supreme Doctrine, or the Realization of Self. I'm not sure which one it was. And it was it sat on on the bedstead for a year without being touched. And one day I picked it up in the midst of a terrible crisis, personal crisis, and I picked it up to read at night, and I could not put it down. I finished the book, and then I went out and looked for the person that he constantly put in his footnotes, who was D.T. Suzuki. And he liked D.T. Suzuki so much that he even translated into French the record of I forget the name of the thing, of the sixth patriarch that D.T. Suzuki had published, and he put it into a French translation of it. And he was very interesting because he was so interested in the psychological meaning of what Satori meant. And this is in the introduction by Siddhiswarananda. And it's very interesting to me. He says, the historical facts are not restricted to a particular time. The state of Satori is not a temporal reality. It's atemporal. The truth of gravitation, for example, existed before Newton. Newton only discovered it, and when he did so, it became an obvious historical fact, capable of being tested and verified, a temporal historical fact which recorded with the atemporal. Our original state is Buddha nature. The historical evidence which has given us the possibility of confirming the truth of this within ourselves is provided by those individuals who attained atemporal realization. They have simply discovered a pre-existing truth. The point where eternity and durational time intersect is the instant. This process, which is unconscious in those of us who have not realized the atemporal, becomes conscious in people who have attained Satori. The experience cannot be called psychological in the sense that it cannot apply to our current limited psyche with its controlled, erroneous way of functioning, but it is psychological or parapsychological if we think of the extended psyche of those who have attained Satori, the living, liberated ones. And this book on Zen Buddhism studies normality, the state of someone who has become normal as a result of a Satori experience. The concept of what constitutes normality is essential for correcting the errors present in anyone who is abnormal. We need to use normal as our reference point in order to understand and assist different kinds of ordinary people. And that's all I want to read on this. It goes on, it's very interesting. And the first time I saw this book, I could not put it down at all, because I was in such a terrible state that everything he wrote about it there, about the confusions and dark moods and everything, was written out so clearly that I felt like I was talking to somebody who was telling me, no, don't get too excited. It's this state and this state and this state. And so I finally went out and got D.T. Suzuki's books. And when I read 2 of his volumes, I had to go find a teacher, and that's how I came to find Suzuki Roshi. And anyway, so that's what I want to base this talk on, as well as what we were talking about. So we always think of Satori, or enlightenment, as an exotic state that only a privileged or spiritually talented people can reach. In Benoit's book, it is described as someone who becomes sane or normal, not an unusual state that carries special benefits to the person, but as an ability to understand their own hang-ups and the troubles of others as well. In other words, a person who lets go of their delusions and is happy to be ordinary, or someone who understands the ordinariness of others and themselves, is neither ordinary nor extraordinary, it's just normal. We had a very interesting discussion recently about self-identity and practice in our group meeting, and I want to talk about that today especially, partly from a discussion I had about it recently with someone, and partly from the book I was reading again. When we come to practice, we often quote Dogen Zenji from the Shobo Genzo. We're fond of quoting his most famous words: to study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Now, to study the self is to forget the self. But the first line is the most important, even though we rush to the second line, which is to study the self is to forget the self. We think that this is much more important than to study the self, and we can keep doing that. When we begin to sit, we have a mind full of thoughts, uncontrollable sensations, and it makes sitting very unpleasant for us in the beginning. And emotions are uncontrollable as well. They come up and they fall constantly. So we'd like to get going and make headway towards some successful condition of sitting that can lead us to a kind of peace, even a little bit. But it escapes us. We're forced to sit with a sulky self or a raging self, a mind and body that won't cooperate with us, and time that seems to be too slow. If we're lucky, we may have a few restful moments of mind and body, but nothing that we can control again. If we're lucky, we may have those restful moments, but it usually only comes when we let go of something without realizing it, and we have a few peaceful moments afterwards. But we don't know how that happened, and so we have no way to bring it about again. When we begin to do meditation, we're faced with the first part of Dogen's words. To study Buddhism is to study the self. We may even have rushed through the first part when we started to meditate because it seemed like the second part is much more important. To study the self is to forget the self. So we may have spent much of our time putting aside everything that we thought was ourself, but we did that to our own disadvantage. We can't put aside or forget what we don't really know, because it will always be there to remind us that we don't understand ourselves yet. We will continue to trip over delusions on which our self is built upon, and we still come up against the limitations we rely on just to keep ourselves in place. And dreams of self-glory continue to plague us, like Snoopy in the Peanuts cartoon, who's always coming up with phrases like, here's the world-famous attorney, here's the world-famous surgeon, here's the world-famous pilot, and so on. Whatever illusions about ourselves we have must go, but not before we are fully acquainted with and accept who we are. We, in fact, are a mixture, a ragtag, ragamuffin conglomeration of ideas, mistaken perceptions, illusions, and strong self-preservations that we are already created and hide behind. And we must come to really like ourselves as we are, as a mixture, a strange mixture. And we have to fully embrace ourselves and like ourselves and accept what we actually made ourselves into. We have to accept that first. And as we find ourselves, before we can forget ourselves, we know that finally we can't forget what we don't know, and we can't put away what we don't have. So the first part of Dogen's words mean a lot of work, a lot of study, a lot of non-judgmental examination, and an open mind, a beginner's mind, looking without fear. Developing a sense of humor about what we find in meditation will take us a long way towards having some peace of mind, but that takes a good amount of time to even happen before we can even think of forgetting the self. If we try to forget ourselves before self is strong and vibrant enough, before we've even matured as a self-contained being, it will continue to poke its fingers in our interests and cause havoc. The self is made up of many parts, emotional, mental, and physical. And before we join it together in understanding, all parts of our unconscious self will surface and interfere before we know it's even happening, as it has done for most of our life. We must study without judgment, learn our inclinations honestly, accept us as we are, and when complex emotions or self-consciousness interfere in our mental and physical states, we have to maintain our balance patiently and continue to study ourselves. If we really want to forget ourselves, we must first join mental, emotional, and physical understanding that we come to know about in self-study, that we just continue to do on the cushion and finally everywhere. Then we may be ready to tackle the second part of Dogen's words. To study the self is to forget the self. When we understand ourselves with compassion, we will be strong enough to no longer need camouflage to exist. The self we truly are will be flexible, changeable, and strong enough that we can explore the world without needing special names anymore to identify us. World famous explorer, world famous artist, world famous teacher, doctor, enlightened this or enlightened that. We don't need them. Buddha nature alone will define us without words, as we are in all of our changes. Whatever identity manifests, names will only be signposts we carry around for talking purposes, easily pulled out and easily put away. And thank you for listening. And here's Peter. Oh, sorry. I don't know if this book is even possible still. Rachel, can this be ordered by anybody that would like to have it? It's a wonderful book. It's really fantastic.
Well, I had the really, the older one is the one that I read a long time ago. And Joko, liked it too. Anyway, I went online and this one is still available. It was new. It's a different translation.
Yeah.
And it's still available. It's from, I think, Sussex Press, but I don't know if it was 25 or 30 or what it was, but I found it on Amazon. Because you mentioned you couldn't find it. So it's still available. The one I sent you, I got through Amazon. The original one, long time ago, I think those would only be in used bookstores, but the one I sent you, I got just through Amazon.
Okay. And the original one, who translated it? It says Aldous Huxley did some.
It's here. The original one was, the foreword was by Aldous Huxley, and
it's also in here.
Yeah, but it's a different translator because Graham Ruth did the new one from the Sussex Press, and I can't remember the name. It's somewhere in the book. It's a different translator in the old one. I don't know why they don't have it in the beginning of it, but they don't. I'm sorry, I
Tensions,
don't
one
remember,
point.
and it's not, for some reason, it's not on the title page.
Who was the
Okay.
original writer?
His
The
name-
writer is Benoit. I mean, the translator. He wrote it
a
in
French,
French.
But
yeah, French psychotherapist, psychologist, I forget which.
named what?
Benoit, Benoit, Hubert. He's really, really good. And it impressed me then, and it's impressing me now still. It's someone who can write about all of this without special categories of words like Buddhism only, So he just talks about everything. He brings it all in. So he's very interesting. Okay. So here we are. Can you sit back a little? There you go. Do you have any questions?
Oh,
Anybody?
all right. It's Terence Gray was the original translator. But Graham Ruth is the new translator.
Yeah, from French.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So does anyone have any questions about anything in here?
Comments?
Comments about Dogen's words or? Yeah, Michael.
When I was listening to your talk, I kept imagining back to the 10 ox herding pictures where you study yourself, you do all this work and everything, and at the very end, you can end up being just yourself again back in life. And it's funny because I've been sitting here thinking about all the books I've read on Zen, all the studying I've done on Zen, and I'm ending up back where I started when I was first fascinated by the 1970s and stuff, and realized that's what I was looking for, was what I've already had. And I've been doing this whole long journey, and I've got all these books stacked up on my floor and in my cabinet, and I got all these words in my head, and I realized I already know this stuff. I've known it since I first started studying it. And I hope I'm understanding your talk right, is that you end up right where you started from. And it doesn't matter anymore. You don't get caught up with names or anything else like that. You just go about living your life. Did I perceive that correctly, or am I wandering off the path?
I think without my saying it, yes, you did. The 10 ox herding pictures, the last one, when he returns, he's just very ordinary. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to be, is ordinary, sane people, normal, in other words. And that we don't understand that all the delusions that we walk around hiding in and camouflage is actually abnormal behavior. And a normal person is someone that feels empathy, compassion, kindness, and all the things that are in us, but we have hidden for a long time. So, yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Chris.
So I forget when exactly or what specifically was said, but and actually this sort of theme has come up a couple times over the years in talks. Just how the ideas we have about ourselves can also be reflected or amplified by other people, and they carry around ideas about us, and we sort of come up against those ideas, and they can get reinforced by other people. And I was wondering if you saw the challenge of studying those ideas as different than the challenge of studying our ideas, and then also that applies to letting them go. Is it's one thing to let our own ideas go, but it's kind of a different challenge because we can't control other people's ideas about us, and so there's all we can do is really let go of our reaction to them, I guess.
Yeah, that's enough. Just letting go of the reaction is enough. Yeah, but to study the self is to study us in the whole world. That means other people's opinions, everything, and how we respond to them, how we believe them or don't believe them or whatever. There's no limit in studying the self. It's just whatever comes up, whatever shows itself, whatever you want to get into. It's what we have to do fully. And I think our emphasis is on forgetting the self really quickly. But I think actually we need a lot more study of the self to understand the bigness of the self we've created, and that creation includes other people's opinions and everything else, and how we feel and how we manifest ourselves. And so all of that we have to be at peace with first before we can give it up, before we can forget the self.
Do you see differences between how like I see myself and how others see me as presenting some sort of challenge?
I see that the self that you see is the one you see. What other people see is just their thing. For you, it's what you feel, what you believe, what you act on. And the rest of it is either you can hang on to it or not. It's up to you.
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you. I love the way you express things so personally, rather than it being a philosophy somewhere out of the clouds. It's very Jane. I find that very, very, very wonderful. I was very sorry not to be able to come last week because I was away from home and visiting family, and I couldn't get my Zoom to work. But anyway, I would have liked to
We
have
missed you.
open discussion. I would have liked to be there for that. And I think that your point, I think, is very good about, the first step is to get clear about who you are. Katagiri Roshi used to say, "Settle the self on the self." That was his phrase. But I think it's easy to understand. Like it's like AA. When they come into a meeting, you say, "I am Paul. I am an alcoholic. I am this." You acknowledge what you are publicly to yourself and to others, and then nobody else can touch you. They can't accuse you of being. You're it's like a blackmailer showing the pictures as being blackmailed by. You can't be blackmailed anymore because you've already admitted to all of who you are. I think that's an incredibly important starting point. But for me as a designer, the third step is the most important, and that is to be informed by all things. So that's once you have enough space, cut enough space, cut a little space in your personal story that you can let other things in, then you can start being informed by your environment, by other people, and by the situation, the time. Everything can be a teacher to you. Once you've made a little space for it.
Yeah, I agree that that's a very important one. And I hope to talk about the second two lines later in my next one. But I think for most people, getting the first one in place is important. And we all rush to the second one. Let's forget the self. And most of the time, we don't even know ourselves well enough to forget anything. We have nothing to hold on to in order to give it up. So we give up ideas, but it's, ideas float. And so we have to really give up something inside. But first, we really have to get to know us. And we have to not only get to know us, but like us as we are, as a mess,
Very, very true.
Yeah. Richard.
Yeah, you can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I always have to ask. Can't we take what you said, there's what we think of ourselves, what others think of us, and then, etc. If we're so deluded that we can't figure out what we are, how come we're so undiluted? And I guess I would have to add psychic to figure out what others really think about us. Because, we don't know. We can't be sure of that because we bring our preconceptions about what, the little silo we put someone else. I'll use an example of myself, like an ex-frat boy or something. So it's assumed you have certain opinions on certain matters, which just aren't true. So there's an old saying: "You're not what you think you are. You're not what they think you are. You're what you think you think they think you are, and even that's wrong. But you get where I'm going. So
Yeah.
if you're going to start with the premise, which I agree with, that you're kind of ignorant to the whole thing, you're ignorant just as much in how others feel about you due to your conditioning in life as you are about yourself.
Yeah.
Is there, do you find anything in there?
I would, Chris, I would say that, if what others think of you is not what is finally going to find peace in ourselves.
Oh, I agree.
It's what, yeah. So when we sit on the cushion, we are making a statement that it's totally us, sitting with us,
Yeah.
and everything comes back to our own hands and how we're going to work this out. So it's only our opinion of ourselves that will finally matter. And the other makes living together with others nice, but still, you can't have your ground shaken by anybody's opinion, because you'll never have peace that way. So yeah, I agree that it's just our study alone that will matter. Yeah. Anybody that wants to step in and add, Paul?
Well, I just there's that great teacher called Popeye that had to say, "I am what I am."
Yes. Anybody else? You can jump in and add your own opinion anytime. It would be very appreciated.
When I was growing up as a kid, the youngest of 4 kids, the first motto I had is, why be normal? In the sense that I didn't want to be like everybody else. So I lived an outlaw life and stuff, and realized that that was also an act and stuff. And I find that listening to your talk, that we have forgotten how to be natural. We've forgotten how to be just, experience life. And I've hammered this a million times, live in the moment. Because if you're in the moment, you're not thinking about what people think about you. You're not thinking about what you think about yourself. You're not thinking about anything but what you're doing at that moment. And the hard part is life constantly pounds you with, you should do this, you should buy this, you should own this, you should be this, you can't be that. And it's learning how to shut that noise off, I find sometimes, because it's the only way I can see myself is when I just sit there and say, okay, it's noise. I'm not paying attention to that anymore. People get mad at me, fine, they get mad at me. People like me, it's wonderful, but it's you've got to be true to yourself, I guess. And I get that from your talk, that's what they're saying. When you discover the self, all your warts and scars and everything like that is you, and embrace it. And it's like, don't worry about it.
Yes, that's exactly right. You learn to love yourself, warts and all, everything, and be happy with it and satisfied with it. And then after you're really satisfied and strong in yourself, then your teaching comes up that, okay, it's time to forget yourself now. So you work really hard to get it all straight, and then you put it aside. And then we'll talk about the next 2 lines afterwards, the ones that Paul mentioned. Okay, so yeah. It's a constant journey, and there's no easy place to rest, but you can make a firm ground of understanding of what you are and how you want to proceed and live in this life. You can make that choice, and very strong choice, but you really have to know yourself, warts and all, first. Who's that? Oh, Rachel?
You don't have to even focus on psychological identities or professional or creative or any other kind of identity. If you just pick age, I mean, you certainly get an identity as being a young person or a middle-aged person or an old person, or do you know what I mean? That's indisputable. No, no, you can't argue,
Yes.
hey, I'm really 20 if you're not. And but that said, I don't think I've ever met anybody who felt the age they supposedly were.
Yeah.
Plenty of people feel 15 and they're quite a bit older than that. What I mean is, in terms of an identity, if it's a psychological one, it sounds like you can just switch hats or switch coats. You can say, I'm an artist, and then 10 years later, hey, I'm wrong. I was really a scientist. But the obvious one is physical and age, and also maybe a disability or something else. But you can also go through the world, and realistically you are physically a certain age, but you don't have to actually have, if you like, that identity of old, and whatever may go along with that. Anyway,
That's just part of the studies. You see yourself as 15 one day and the next day you feel like 95. It's just, those are real too, the feelings, the emotional feelings you have with how you feel, alive or half dead or whatever. Those are all parts of studying yourself, learning how you change, among other things. Anybody else want to say something before we close shop?
Oh wait, actually no, never mind. Yeah, we got a full moon ceremony, so maybe I'll save my question for Tuesday or Thursday night.
No, say it now quickly. We'll go through it fast.
Okay. Generally, tying the topic of your talk in with the sort of difference between big self, and small self, and if you have had some thoughts on times when Dogen, because so full disclosure, I just heard Brad Warner give a talk about this, and he was talking a lot about the words Jiko and Ware, and how Dogen was using them, and they both translate to English as self, but they mean different things. And I was wondering if that is something you have observed and had thoughts about.
I don't know Wade, but Jiko, I think, is just your personal self. Paul, what do you know that one?
Well,
Peter?
what is this personal pronoun, right?
Oh, that's right, Wade, Watashi, Wade, yeah.
And
It's just a word to use I.
It's formal word for I.
Yeah. And Jiko means self, like the personal self. But Brad Warner has a lot of experience in Japanese language, so he probably knows much better on that than I would. I'm afraid I don't know that at all, except Jiko means self.
Do you see Dogen using? Do you see when we read Dogen that sometimes the word self refers to personal small self, and sometimes it refers to big, more universal self, or the source, or whatever?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to figure out which is which. Not really figure out, but he does use the same thing. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where he gets into big self when he's talking about the third and the fourth line of his when the body and mind drop away, and the body and mind of others, everyone drops away. I think he's referring to the big mind there. I think. Would you say that, Paul or Peter?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. So body and mind dropping away is Jiko dropping away. Wadi is how you talk when you say hello or I'm here or whatever. Does anybody else want to say anything to add to this before we stop? Okay.